Hi, I'm Kalia. I wasn't invited to my own family's reunion, again. 10 years. 10 years of silence, edited photos, and empty chairs with my name never spoken. They said I was too sensitive, too distant, too dramatic, but this time I didn't fight for a seat at their table. I bought the whole beach house. So when they showed up with their luggage and fake smiles, and the front desk asked, "Are you on Miss Gellhorn's guest list?" they finally had to say my name, or leave. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Monday mornings weren't supposed to feel like this. Usually they began with coffee gone cold before the first sip, a half-eaten protein bar, and a sea of work emails I could ignore until my second cup. But this morning? This morning started with something else. I was halfway through sorting logistics for a medical symposium when the subject line popped up on my screen. Bold, cheerful, and completely gutting. Brooks Family Beach Week 2025 RSVP now. My breath caught. I clicked before I could stop myself. Everyone was CC'd. Trinity, Bryce, Aunt Mel, even Cousin Darren, who's been MIA since the Clinton administration. But my name? Not there. Not in the thread. Not in the original list. Not even a typo. They hadn't just forgotten me. I wasn't included. At all. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. There they were. Dozens of replies, little quips, memories from last year. Someone even posted a photo of the fire pit at sunset. The same fire pit where I roasted marshmallows at age 8, before I knew that love in this family came with terms and expiration dates. I scrolled lower, hoping, stupidly, for a second email, a correction, anything. But I already knew better. This wasn't the first time. Last year's invite must have gone to spam, Trinity had said when I called her crying. You know how tech can be, she added with a chuckle, as if erasing me from the family calendar was a software glitch. I closed the thread and just sat there. My office suddenly felt too big, too sterile. The framed degree on my wall looked like it belonged to someone else. The sunlight bouncing off the Santa Monica skyline felt like a cruel joke. California warmth with a cold void in my chest. I turned to my bookshelf, almost unconsciously, and there it was, the turquoise glass seashell. It sat on the second shelf, behind outdated industry manuals and a neglected jade plant, a birthday gift from when I was 10. My mom had picked it up at a roadside antique store and told me it looked like something special for her special girl. That was before she started calling Trinity her pride, before she began introducing me to her friends as the one who's always busy with work. Before I learned that being the youngest didn't mean being loved more, it just meant being useful longer. You okay? I jumped. Remington was standing by my desk, holding his mug of oversteeped green tea. I swallowed. Yeah, just a spam email. He raised an eyebrow. From them again? I didn't answer, just offered a tight-lipped smile and went back to my laptop. But I didn't reopen the symposium document. My hands hovered, and then I shut the laptop completely. The promotion packet was still on my desk. Senior Vice President, at 38. The youngest candidate in the firm's history. The title I had bled for. Surviving boardroom politics, 12-hour days, and being overlooked by men with fewer ideas and more golf trophies. And yet, none of that mattered. Not to them. To them, I was the one who moved too far, worked too much, and forgot her roots. My phone buzzed. A text from Savannah. Saw the invite? Want to crash it just for laughs? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, or maybe it's time I did something smarter. I opened the tab I'd bookmarked weeks ago. Real estate listings, specifically the beach house. The house where Trinity took her maternity photos. The house where my parents toasted their 30th anniversary while I was out of state for a conference and forgot to even tell me. It was up for sale, quietly. No family announcement, no group chat message. The market had dipped, and they were offloading it like old furniture. I stared at the listing, the wraparound porch, the view of the water, the same chairs where I'd once listened to my dad read Steinbeck aloud, before he started pretending he couldn't hear my calls. So this was what they'd come to. I moved the cursor slowly over the button. Contact agent. My finger hovered and clicked. The confirmation email from the realtor hadn't even sunk in when my phone rang. Same ringtone I'd assigned to her years ago. Same feeling in my chest. Tight, expectant, resigned. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I knew it was her. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," I said flatly, already bracing. "Kalia, dear," she began, using that voice, that sugary sing-song tone she pulled out when she was about to do something she knew would hurt, but wanted to sound polite while doing it. I didn't wait for the rest. "Let me guess, Trinity's kids need the bunk room again, or maybe Nelson's new girlfriend is allergic to hotel pillows?" There was silence, long enough for me to imagine her blinking at her perfectly manicured nails, searching for the next line in her script. Then, finally, she said, "You know how chaotic it gets with little ones, and we're just limited in space this year." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I could have written her dialogue for her. "You understand, don't you, Kalia?" she added gently, almost pitifully. "It's just logistics." I remembered that same phrase from 2 years ago. Same time of year, same voice. The last time I tried to attend. She had called me the day before, whispering apologies like confessions in a booth. "You understand, don't you?" she'd said then, too. "The little ones need the bunk room." And I did understand. I understood that my presence was always optional to them. The only time I was truly needed was when someone wanted help paying for something. "I understand perfectly," I said now. "Thanks for the heads up." Before she could respond, I ended the call. But I didn't throw my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow. I simply got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with the steadiness of someone who'd known this was coming. Back at my desk, I opened a spreadsheet. My personal financials. The numbers stared back at me like loyal soldiers, organized, unflinching, ready. I checked the amount of liquid cash I had access to, reviewed the vesting dates on my company stock options, scanned the line item labeled discretionary assets. Then I whispered, "Let's play then." 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time it was Savannah, screenshot incoming. She never sent a text without warning me first. I opened the image. It was from a group chat I wasn't in. Of course I wasn't. "Trinity, don't worry, Kalia said she's not coming again. Wants to make it about herself as usual." Then came the reactions. A few "oh no" texts, some laughing emojis. One from Uncle Jack. "That girl needs therapy." I stared at it, numb. But underneath the numbness was something else. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. They weren't just omitting me. They were rewriting me. Turning absence into blame. Muting my voice, then filling the silence with their own version of who I was. "To them," I murmured, "I'm a shadow who abandoned the light." But I knew the truth. I hadn't walked away from warmth. I had escaped the cold. My mind drifted back to the summer I turned 10. The family had gathered at that same beach house. I spent hours sculpting a mermaid from wet sand, braided seaweed hair, shell earrings, even a pebble necklace. The family circled around it, amazed. Then Trinity stepped forward, placed her hand on the mermaid's head, and smiled for the camera. "She's so creative," Mom had said, clapping. I didn't correct her. Neither did Trinity. That night, I cried in the bunk room while they toasted Trinity's talent downstairs. Back in the present, I opened the real estate app again and scrolled to the beach house listing. No hesitation this time. I scheduled a private appointment with the realtor. No one needed to know. There wouldn't be a scene. There wouldn't be a warning. Only action. Quiet, precise, and irreversible. The next morning, I walked into the beachfront office, a sleek blue glass building nestled between a surf shop and a boutique cafe. A woman with graying curls and a lavender scarf stood from behind the desk. "You must be Kalia," she said warmly. "I was told you'd come by today." I nodded. "Thanks for fitting me in." She gestured to a chair. "Funny thing," she said as she pulled up the listing on her tablet. "Your name sounds familiar. Are you related to the current owners?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "Yes, but not for long." The ocean breeze carried a chill as I stepped into the narrow hallway of the storage facility. The scent of dust and concrete was oddly grounding, like the scent of memory itself. Unit 43B. I hadn't opened it in nearly 5 years. The lock clicked open. I pushed the roll-up door upward, its metal teeth groaning in protest. Inside were pieces of a life I'd shed. My first apartment's furniture, boxes labeled college, a crate of books from my days chasing corporate dreams in heels too tight and blazers too sharp. In the far corner sat the old cedar trunk, my grandmother's. I pulled it forward and brushed off the film of time that coated it. The latch was stiff, but it gave way with a determined tug. Inside, the familiar scent of lavender sachets she used to keep in her dresser drawers. My throat tightened. The first thing I saw was the journal, ocean blue with seashells glued to the corners in her unmistakably clumsy pattern. I used to tease her about it. "They'll fall off in a week," I'd said once, and she'd smiled. "Then you'll have to glue your own truth to it." Underneath was a sealed envelope addressed in her slanted script. "For Kylia. Open only when you stop looking for permission." I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it. Inside was a letter and a trust document. The letter was short, just a few lines. "One day you'll understand why I left this just for you. Love doesn't always come from those who raise us. Sometimes it finds its way through the cracks. Use this when the silence becomes unbearable." I blinked, rereading it. The trust document was real, not symbolic, not sentimental, legal. I flipped pages with trembling hands. My name, her signature, witnesses, a clause. Should the existing deed holders become financially delinquent or fail to meet property obligations, the named beneficiary reserves the right to execute a full title transfer. I didn't understand it all, but I knew enough, and I knew exactly who could explain the rest. By the time I walked into the law offices of McCarran and Wells in Newport Beach the next morning, I was already 5 steps ahead of where I had been just days ago. The woman behind the desk, Maribel, offered coffee while I waited. 10 minutes later, I sat across from a partner in his 60s with glasses perched low on his nose and a folder labeled Trust A. Brooks Estate. He flipped through the pages with a soft whistle. "This clause," he said, tapping one line, "isn't just enforceable. It's a failsafe. If your parents defaulted on taxes or lapsed on insurance, you don't just have leverage, you have controlling interest. And if that's already happened?" He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Then all you have to do is sign this petition. The title will transfer to you in 14 business days unless contested. But based on what I see, they wouldn't stand a chance." I let the weight of that settle. 14 days. The same amount of time they'd be packing coolers and loading beach chairs, assuming the house was still theirs to decorate. That afternoon, I sat by my window with her journal in my lap. I didn't write anything. I just traced the broken shells along the cover, letting my fingers remember the texture of childhood. Then I reached across my desk for the turquoise glass seashell. It had collected dust for years, tucked behind tax receipts and unused notebooks. I set it beside the journal. They matched. Same color, same iridescence, same quiet defiance. It struck me then. How symbolic it all was. The shell, the journal, the claws, all the little things they thought were forgotten. But I hadn't forgotten. They had. I stared at the trust papers one last time before signing. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Only ready. The lawyer handed me a copy. "It's done. Transfer is in motion." "They have no idea, do they?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "They will. Soon." Back home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the listing for the beach house again. A new photo had been added. The front porch, adorned with twinkle lights, ready for summer guests. Let them plan their party. Let them arrive with gifts and guilt and cheap wine. Let them toast to unity on a property they thought was theirs. They forgot to read the paper that mattered most. I wasn't reclaiming the house. I was invoking what was already mine. The silence after signing the petition was deceptive, almost soothing. But beneath it stirred something I hadn't felt in years. Leverage. The next morning, I brewed a strong cup of black coffee, opened my laptop, and watched my inbox refresh. A new email blinked at the top. Reminder, Brooks Family Reunion final RSVP this week. It was sent from a new address, Trinity's personal Gmail. The subject line reeked of faux warmth, but the body of the email hit differently. Room assignments, scheduled activities. a curated Spotify playlist, even beach games labeled family versus family. And my name? Missing. Again. No hi Kalia, no mention in the thread, not even a slip of we hope to see you there. But Trinity had CC'd everyone else. 5 minutes later, a separate ping. Savannah. Subject, you need to see this. Her message was short. I know you weren't included again. She made a new group. This one is worse. Attached were screenshots. A group chat titled Core Brooks Only. Trinity had posted, Kalia's not coming again, let's just move forward without the drama this time. Someone, probably Nelson, had replied with a laughing emoji and a gif of a peace sign. Then, the kicker. Savannah's message continued. Your mom asked me if I'd be okay staying in your old room. Said it was just sitting there anyway. I read that line twice. Your old room. The same room with my grandmother's handmade quilt. The same room with my childhood bookshelf. The mural we painted together when I was 12. The tiny brass desk where I wrote my first college essay. They weren't just forgetting me. They were offering my bones to the wolves. I didn't cry. I sat back, closed my eyes, and let the reality of it settle in. Then I opened my real estate portal and logged into the back-end system I now legally had access to. Short-term rentals, owner rights, property scheduling. I pulled up the calendar. Only one room remained unbooked, the master suite, king bed, private deck, full ocean view. I smiled faintly and began to type. Guest, Miss C. Brooks, arrival Friday, length of stay 3 nights. Then I scrolled to the preferences field and added, please place welcome bottle of Perrier Jouet champagne on ice. Guest prefers firm pillows, cotton sheets, and full privacy. Click. Confirmation appeared. A ping echoed in my inbox. Their reunion? Booked under my name? The irony made my shoulders relax. Let's see how they explain that to each other. Later that night, I paced the living room with a glass of wine, the fireplace flickering low behind me. I held my phone, thumbing through years of photo archives. Family reunions where I'd taken the pictures but never appeared in them. Graduation dinners I was too busy to attend, according to them. Birthdays where my gifts arrived in the mail, unwrapped and unmentioned. One particular photo caught my eye, Trinity blowing out candles while I stood behind her smiling. Only my head had been conveniently cropped for the version posted online. That's who I'd been to them. An accessory, a utility, until I wasn't needed anymore. I thought back to Dad's words years ago when I finally stood up for myself. You're just too sensitive, Kalia. Not everything's about you. But this house, this moment, was about me. Not because I needed recognition, but because I finally held the pen, and I was writing myself back into the story. Before going to bed, I sent Savannah one last text. Thanks for the heads up. Don't cancel your plans, just be ready for some awkward silences. She responded with a laughing emoji and 3 words. I live for this. The beach house was theirs to borrow, but the key? It was already in my hand. There was one room left to reserve, the one with the view and the deed. After finalizing the reservation, I didn't linger on the confirmation screen. I closed the tab, shut the laptop, and stepped away, physically and mentally. The next morning, I drove east, away from the beach, away from the buzz, toward the hills just past the citrus groves where Grandma was buried. No fanfare, no flowers. Just a single scoop of lavender honey ice cream from the tiny parlor she used to love, balanced precariously in a sugar cone. It was tradition, a quiet one, the kind that meant something when no one else was looking. I pulled into the cemetery just as the wind picked up, tossing curls of dry grass across the stone rows. Her marker sat nestled between 2 small rose bushes she never liked. Too performative, she once whispered. Give me thyme or basil, something useful. I smiled at the memory and sat beside her grave on the still warm grass. Hey, Grandma, I said softly. They're doing it again. You'd roll your eyes so hard. I let the wind carry the silence a moment longer. Then I placed the cone in front of her nameplate and whispered, You once told me not to raise my voice, just raise my value. I did. I really did. A few minutes passed. I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either. The quiet had a way of holding you still, like she used to without words, just presence. That kind of stillness doesn't come from peace. It comes from knowing who you are, even when everyone else tries to define you for their convenience. I stood, dusted off my jeans, and walked back to the car. My phone buzzed before I could even start the engine. It was from the Brooks family chat. A screenshot of the message glared at me. I called dibs on the master suite. Feels good to be back. Let the reunion begin. Nelson, of course. As if the room was some prize he'd earned. As if he'd built the house brick by brick and not slept his way through college on a mattress I paid for while he wrecked my credit one loan at a time. Comments followed. Classic Nelson. Ooh, big dog. Claim it before the kids destroy it. I sat with the phone resting on the steering wheel, reading every single one. None of them questioned it. None of them asked who had booked the house. None of them saw me. Or maybe they just hoped I'd stay invisible. But not this time. I opened the thread and typed, "That room is already reserved, under my name." Hit send. Nothing for a long minute. Then the chat fell quiet. No emojis, no laughing gifs, no follow-ups. And then, as expected, came the private message. Trinity. What are you trying to do? I stared at her words. My thumb hovered, considering. Then I typed, slow and precise. I'm not trying, I warned you. You just never took me seriously. I watched the seen status appear beneath it. And then I muted the chat, blocked the thread, logged out. Not from anger, from peace, from clarity. Because when you no longer need someone else's approval to exist, you start acting like you own the ground you walk on. And in this case, I literally did. I drove home in silence. The roads were mostly empty. Somewhere along the highway, my reflection caught in the rearview mirror. Stern, but softer than I remembered. Like something had loosened under the surface. Not revenge, not yet. Just certainty. Later that night, I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began to draft a note to the property manager confirming my stay. I wasn't doing it for drama. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was simply living in the truth. The truth they had ignored for years. The truth that now had a deed, a legal clause, and my name on it in bold print. They'd dismissed my name on every invitation for a decade. But this time, they'd have to say it out loud at the check-in desk. The sun had barely dipped beneath the horizon when I pulled into a quiet overlook just half a mile from the beach house. I'd planned it this way, just long enough after sunset that the house would already be buzzing with voices I wasn't invited to join. I watched their cars arrive one by one earlier that evening from my parked rental. Trinity's white Audi, Nelson's oversized SUV with the tinted windows he thought made him important, and finally my mother's aging sedan, still bearing the faded, proud grandma sticker on the bumper. They didn't see me. They never really had. At 6:45 p.m., I saw them begin to unload luggage with a flurry of laughter and purposeful motion. Their voices echoed down the breezeway, distorted by the salty air. I waited. Gave them just enough time to walk into what used to be theirs. Then I drove forward slowly. As I approached the main reception, I could see Trinity already at the desk, animated, gesturing wildly. Nelson leaned against the marble counter like he owned the place, and my mother stood behind them with that familiar pursed expression, equal parts judgment and denial. I stepped inside, heels clicking against the cool tile, just as the young woman behind the desk asked again, politely, "So, you're not on Miss Kalia Gellhorn's guest list?" Trinity's face twisted. "Excuse me? I don't care what system you're looking at. This is our family's house. We've been coming here for over 20 years. The receptionist's eyes flicked to mine. She blinked once, twice, then offered the faintest smile. Miss Gellhorn, welcome. I was just explaining. I heard." I stepped beside Trinity without even looking at her. "There's no need to escalate. I'll clarify things." Nelson straightened. "What is this, Kalia? Some prank? You really think this is funny?" "I think it's overdue." I handed my ID to the receptionist. "The deed finalized 3 weeks ago. The house is mine." The silence that followed was not the kind that waits for someone to speak. It was the kind that shatters the floor beneath you. Iris clutched her purse tighter. You bought it? That's impossible." No, Mom, I said gently, but not softly. It's legal, it's clean, and it's final. You should have checked the mail, or the trust agreement Grandma left me. Trinity turned a shade I'd only ever seen on wilted roses. Why would you do this? You knew we were planning the reunion. This was meant to be our space. And I was meant to be your daughter, your sister. But you left me off every email, every invite, every photo, so I found my own way in. The receptionist looked between us, visibly unsure whether to step back or stay still. Nelson barked out a laugh, the kind that masked panic. You think you can just kick us out? You think you've won something? I turned to him slowly. No, Nelson, I think I reclaimed something. That's different. Then I looked at the desk clerk and said calmly, Please help escort anyone not listed under my guest registry. Be kind, of course, they're family. A beat of hesitation passed, then she nodded and picked up the phone to call security. Not urgent, just standard. Like this was any normal check-in process. I'll contest this, Trinity muttered behind me. You'll hear from our lawyer. You might want to review the clause on defaulted taxes and failed maintenance first, I replied, still facing forward. You might be surprised by how much was already in motion before you even clicked send on your guest list. My mother stepped forward then, voice quiet. You really hate us that much? I turned. For a moment, I let the silence linger. Then I said what needed to be said, not cruelly, not bitterly, just honestly. I don't hate you. I just stopped hoping you'd change. With that, I walked toward the elevator, the sound of their confusion dissolving behind me like salt in wind. As the doors slid closed, I felt my breath slow. Not in relief, but in readiness. Because what came next wasn't silence, it was war. I had just finished making tea in the quiet of the kitchen when the knock came, not on my door but on the glass window facing the beach. Not the kind of knock from a guest or neighbor. This one came with the blinding pulse of a news van's headlights behind it. I stepped closer, pulling the curtain slightly. A man with a mic in hand and that greasy, camera-ready smile was already positioning himself toward the lens. Another crew member pointed directly at the house. At me. I didn't need to hear the opening lines to know how the segment would go. The moment I opened the front door, the reporter's voice hit me like a wave. Miss Gellhorn, can you confirm whether you coerced your elderly father into signing over the family property? Sources say he wasn't of sound mind. Behind them, the red light of the camera blinked steady and unforgiving. I didn't answer, not with words. I closed the door and walked away. By the time I reached the living room, my phone was vibrating with a fury I hadn't felt since the day I found out my name was left off the will. Again. There were texts from former neighbors, coworkers, a cousin I hadn't heard from since our grandmother's funeral. Is any of this true? And then, the email. Temporary injunction notice. Occupancy of 404 Ocean Crest Boulevard must cease immediately pending court review. Violation may result in financial penalty. And the cherry on top? A screenshot Savannah forwarded, Trinity's latest post. A woman who turns on her own family was never raised with love to begin with. I pray for her soul. Underneath were comments filled with fire emojis, sad face reactions, and, so sorry, praying for your family notes from people who hadn't known my name until yesterday. I stared at it all, the phone in my hand, the headlines forming without me. I should have been prepared. But nothing quite prepares you for being publicly labeled a predator, especially by people who once kissed your scraped knees and braided your hair. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I sat down in the stillness of the master suite and looked across the room at a framed photograph I hadn't packed away yet. Me at 7, clinging to my father's leg. Both of us laughing so hard the photo came out blurred. A time before silence replaced softness. Was I that same girl? Would he even recognize me now? The tears came, but they didn't belong to sadness. They belonged to a grief that had matured into something older, something tired. Hours passed, maybe more. The house was still. The ocean roared outside like a witness, unmoved. I found myself wandering the built-in bookshelf by the staircase, running my hand along the wood grooves. My fingers brushed something. Tucked behind a row of old novels was a small seashell, pale ivory with a faint blue stripe, the one he'd helped me find the summer before Trinity went to college. You deserve everything good this world can give you, he had said that day, resting it in my palm like it was the rarest thing he'd ever seen. I closed my fingers around it, whispering, "You said that. Once." But the man who said it no longer existed. Not in the court documents filed under his name, not in the media blitz that followed his daughter's signature. That version of him had been overwritten, and so had I. They'd painted me as a villain so thoroughly, it almost made me forget who I really was, until Savannah texted. A simple line, "They wanted war, let's start with truth." And then came the files, screenshots, dozens of them, family group chats, private email threads, notes passed between my sister and mother, Trinity mocking me for being emotionally fragile. My mother writing, "She's too busy being important to care about family. Don't feel bad excluding her. She's used to being alone." My hands were still. I didn't gasp, didn't scream, but I felt a pulse in my chest that hadn't been there in days, like breath finding its way back through cracked ribs. So this was the game. They hadn't just left me out. They'd spent years erasing me behind closed doors. I looked down at the seashell again. This wasn't the moment I'd been crushed. This was the moment I started writing the rest of the story. I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank document, and titled it with the date. Then I typed, "The truth, as preserved in digital ash." What they didn't realize, the silence they demanded all those years had taught me one thing they'd never learn, how to outlast them, because I had patience, receipts, and now, a reason. And I wasn't cornered anymore. Link to next chapter. I'd been cornered before. This time I came with matches. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray. Not stormy, not bright. Just the kind of overcast that makes everything feel muted, like the world's holding its breath. I walked into the courthouse flanked by silence. No entourage, no lawyers in Armani, just me, in a navy dress Grandma once called steel-willed blue, and a simple folder clutched to my chest. Everything I needed was in that folder, and everything they'd hoped would never surface. Inside the courtroom, the air had that distinct, sterile chill I remembered from when we settled Grandma's estate, a place where family pretended to be civilized while the knives stayed tucked under smiles. Iris sat 2 rows ahead, stiffer than usual. Her eyes didn't flicker when I walked in. Trinity was there too, in an all-white pantsuit that looked like it cost a month's rent in Newport. She didn't turn around, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from the way her blazer sat on her back. Nelson, as expected, was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding behind a cease and desist draft. The clerk called the case. Gellhorn v. Brooks, petition for injunction against the sale of family real estate under claim of manipulation and elder exploitation. The judge looked up from his notes, adjusted his glasses, and nodded toward Trinity's side. "Counsel?" Her lawyer stood, slick, young, too smooth for his own good. "Your Honor, the petitioner contends that Miss Kalia Gellhorn exploited her father during a time of declining health, resulting in the unauthorized transfer of deed rights to the property in question." He made sure to pause just enough before exploited, like the word had weight. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at my mother. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge's desk. "And you, Miss Gellhorn?" I stood slowly, unfolded the top flap of my folder. "With the court's permission," I said, "I'd like to present video and audio evidence of consent and family dynamics relevant to this case." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom dimmed slightly as the bailiff cued the video. It was shot on a sunny porch 2 years ago. My father sat beside me, sipping coffee, voice clear and unmistakably sound. "I want Kalia to have this place. She's the only one who came back for me after the fall. She's the only one who ever asked how I was doing, not what I could give." The camera panned to me. I wasn't crying then, but I was close. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. "I'm sure. They always made her feel like a guest. She's not a guest, she's the legacy." Gasps murmured behind me. Even Iris shifted in her seat. But I wasn't done. Next came the audio recording, trimmed and spliced by Savannah, time-stamped just 6 months ago. Trinity's voice, hissing through a group call. "Let her rot in her condo. She was never part of this family. Not really. If she wanted in, she should have been easier to control." The judge raised a brow, looked directly at Trinity. She tried to sit taller but shrank inside that designer suit. After a long silence, he leaned forward. This court finds no basis for the petition. The video shows full mental clarity and intent. The audio displays targeted exclusion. Miss Gellhorn acted lawfully and ethically. He paused, then added with a firm edge, "This court is not here to resolve decades of resentment, nor to validate cruelty disguised as tradition. Case dismissed." Trinity froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. Iris stared straight ahead, pale as the collar of her blazer. I gathered my folder and left without looking back. Outside, the media buzzed like flies on honey. "Miss Gellhorn? Any comment?" I turned toward them only once. "Sometimes the only way to break a cycle," I said, "is to walk away holding your truth." The flashbulbs clicked, but I kept walking. Down the steps, past the polished marble, onto the sidewalk, and then toward my car parked near the courthouse lawn. There was no applause, no violin soundtrack swelling in the background, just my own quiet steps and a breeze that finally smelled like salt again. I stopped for a moment at the edge of the parking lot, let the wind catch my hair, closed my eyes and listened, not for approval, not for closure, but for the sound of my own breath. They had their narrative. I had the truth. And that day, the truth didn't shout. It won. Link to next chapter. As the wind picked up across the dunes, I realized the beach house was never the reward. I was. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the ocean air had already changed. Saltier, somehow softer. The kind of breeze that didn't just brush against your skin, it reminded you to breathe deeper. I stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the last few months fall away, grain by grain. The beach house stood in front of me, sunlit and quiet. For years, I'd driven past it with my eyes turned away. Now, the keys in my hand didn't feel like a trophy. They felt like something older, something I'd once lost and had to grow strong enough to deserve again. Inside, the place looked like someone had left in a hurry. A water glass half full on the counter, folded towels still sitting by the staircase. There were picture frames on the hallway wall, photos of Trinity's kids, summer dinners, backyard bonfires I'd never been invited to. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering over one of the frames, but I didn't take it down. I walked past them slowly, my shoes making the kind of hollow sound wood floors always give when a house is holding its breath. Upstairs, the master bedroom was bright, the bed untouched. My name was on the deed, but their fingerprints were still here. In the curtains, the leftover shampoo bottles, even the music playlist still loaded on the smart speaker. I let them be. In the office room, once Grandma's, there was a low cabinet drawer I'd avoided touching until now. I sat cross-legged on the floor, slid it open gently, and there it was, the seashell wind chime we'd made when I was 8. It was tangled in fishing line, a few shells cracked, the soft blue string frayed and dusty. One of the painted initials, my C, had worn off entirely. I didn't rush to fix it. I sat with it, turned each piece in my hand like a memory I hadn't let myself touch in years. I could hear her laugh in my head, could almost feel the way she would pause to examine each shell, saying, "Not every broken thing needs to be replaced, Kalia. Some things just need a steadier hand." I took it downstairs and laid it across the kitchen table. Thread by thread, I began to repair it. No glue, no shortcuts, just patience and quiet. The sound of the waves through the open screen door became a rhythm, keeping time as I worked. The wind chime didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to ring again. Later that afternoon, Savannah showed up with a bottle of wine in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. "You didn't think I'd let you settle in here without at least some Pinot and paper towels, did you?" She smiled. We cleaned in silence for a while, two sisters who'd watched the same family drama unfold from opposite seats. We scrubbed the counter where Trinity once held court with her cheese platters and casual cruelty. We folded blankets that Iris used to keep for special guests only. The absurdity of it all made me laugh. When we finally settled on the porch with wine glasses in hand, the sun had dipped just enough to color the water rose gold. Savannah turned to me. "You didn't just win, Kalia. You undid it. You unhooked yourself from all of it. I didn't answer right away. I was watching a pair of pelicans glide low over the waves, wings outstretched, unbothered. A knock came at the gate about an hour later. I tensed instinctively, but it wasn't Trinity or Iris. It was Mrs. Donnelly from 2 houses down, holding a tin of lemon bars. I just wanted to say, "Welcome home," she said. "Your father used to talk about you, you know, more than the others. Always said you were the smart one." I blinked. "He did?" She nodded. "Of course. Said you were the one who asked about the tide tables when you were 6. That girl thinks in tides," he told me once. I never forgot that. I stood there, a tin of lemon bars suddenly heavier than anything I'd carried all week. I thanked her and watched her disappear down the walkway. After she left, I hung the wind chime just outside the porch. It swayed gently, catching the breeze like it remembered what it was made for. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. Maybe they'll never apologize. Maybe there'll never be a family dinner where someone says, "You were right." But that's no longer my burden. I'm not waiting for them to fix it, or name it, or even admit it. I built a life that didn't require their permission. I reclaimed something bigger than a house. I reclaimed my voice and my silence. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped begging to cross it. As dusk fell, I turned off the lights room by room. I closed the front door slowly, this time from the inside. And just before it clicked shut, the seashells behind me caught the wind and whispered,